According to my understanding, in fact, Lehi is going through the same process that Moses went through when he became a prophet. Remember, this goes back to recognizing Nephi and Lehi as legitimate prophets. He's following the steps of Moses, and so this pillar of fire is actually the burning bush. Now, what's interesting about this is that Nephi seems to be basing this part of the text on a passage in Numbers 12:6. At one moment, we have Moses, whose wife has passed, and he goes out and marries a new wife, and it's this Ethiopian woman, and his family, his brother and sister, immediately get all upset and offended at what he's done, and they come out and they say, well, clearly he's not a prophet anymore, we're all prophets too, we can lead the people, and the Lord calls all three of them out of the tribes of Israel and choose out Miriam and Aaron, and says to them this, and this is Numbers 12:6, he says, "Hear now my words, if there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream." Of course, in 1 Nephi, we have this passage, right? Lehi goes home after seeing a pillar of fire and a rock. He says, "It came to pass, he prayed the Lord, there came a pillar of fire, dwelt upon a rock before him. He saw and heard much, and because of the things he saw and heard, he did quake and tremble exceedingly. And he goes home and throws himself on his bed. And it says, and thus being overcome of the Spirit, he was carried away in a vision, even that he saw the heavens open, and he thought he saw God sitting upon his throne, surrounded with numberless concourses of angels, the attitude of singing and praising their God." And then I'm going to jump forward to 1 Nephi 2:1. "For behold, it came to pass, the Lord spake unto my father, yea, even in a dream, and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Lehi, because of the things which thou hast done, because thou hast been faithful and declared unto this people the things which I commanded thee. Behold, they seek to take away thy life." Nephi here is following some very distinct Old Testament patterns to prove the legitimacy of his and his father's prophetic calling. The last thing I'm going to mention, just briefly, is this, and this is kind of funny because this has come up a couple of times in this conference, and that is this 3-day trip that they take into the wilderness. It's interesting. Eugene England is the quote, one of the quotes that I have here. He says this. He says, "The route at times were quite specific, even somewhat mysteriously so." And he quotes, "He came down by the borders which are near the Red Sea. When he had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his tent in the valley by the side of the river of water." This literal interpretation of 3 days has long been accepted and understood in LDS circles as being a helpful tidbit in determining the geography of Lehi's trek to the coast of the sea, where they then sailed to the New World. Instead of viewing this as a literal approach, what I like to look at this is this 3-day trip in Exodus, mentioned in Exodus 3:18, where after Moses has been called as a prophet, his first command is to go back to Egypt, to the Israelites, and then to tell Pharaoh. He says, "The Lord God of the Hebrews hath met with us, and now let us go, we beseech thee, 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God." Now this is mentioned over and over again in the next several chapters in the Old Testament. This 3-day journey actually occurred. It was a trip between Egypt and Marah, which is interesting in the fact that they have this body of water there, by which the place is named, because the water was bitter, so they called the place Bitterness. There were a number of other issues there. Among them was the fact that when Pharaoh says, "Why do you have to go so far?" Moses responds, "Well, if we stay here and offer our burnt offerings, which are, of course, anathema to you Egyptians, you'll kill us all, because we're inside your cultic holiness area." The same could be true of Lehi and Nephi, for them to go out and offer burnt offerings and renew this new covenant that they're making with the Lord in downtown Jerusalem. Would certainly cause some significant difficulties for them. I'm going to close, since I've pretty much expended my time. The truth is, I haven't had enough time to take these ideas to their logical conclusion, and I think we can find dozens of additional details and parallels. It could be that these things all fall into that nebulous category of typing in the Book of Mormon. I think, however, that Nephi, when he tells us that he likens all scriptures unto themselves, that he actually is doing that not only the scriptures he's reading, but the scriptures he's writing. And we can find these parallels. We have these several very distinct Noah parallels as he builds his boat. There's even more with this story of Joseph going into Egypt. We have the binding in the wilderness, a slaying leaving for beasts. We have this whole concept of Nephi as being an interpreter of dreams, which is very interesting. He starts with his father's dream, he gets through just bits and pieces. Whoops, we're all done with this now, let's talk about this. And the first thing that happens is his brothers come up and say to him, what's the meaning of this? And he explains it to them. I think perhaps that it may be difficult to reconstruct areas of textual reliance between the brass plates and the Book of Mormon because we don't really have a brass plates to compare. But like this, the Book of Mormon can give us additional insight in the scriptures they carry with them. We can see that not only did they have more in some areas and less in others, but it can also give us a better understanding of the Bible and where it's at in terms of how the brass plates fit in that picture. I'd like to close just by stating that this apologetics work that I've been involved in with FAIR has been a great source of joy and personal satisfaction in dealing with the gospel in new ways and learning, straying some of them strange, and learning new ideas, new ways of looking at stuff. And I think that this is the type of stuff that we as saints need to be doing, is building our own personal testimonies of the gospel through answering these questions for ourselves. And I have closing issues.
We do have time for maybe one or two questions that you want, if you have to ask Ben, and then we'll take our break. So you're still back on stage now.
Earlier you alluded to the fact that, there'd be blood all over Laban's armor and so forth. But you never did finish that up.
My personal... there we go. The truth is, my personal ideas about that are quite a bit off the beaten track. I would say that based on the fact that he's writing the story to prove a point, means that it probably got some of the details out of chronological order as they actually occurred historically. And that maybe it's much more likely that Nephi finds Laban laying there, passed out, drunk in the middle of the road, takes off his armor, gets ready to hoof it back to the brass plates, and that's when the Spirit says, no, wait a minute, you better go back and finish the job here. So I believe that's not really an issue. It only becomes an issue because these parts of the stories are right next to each other when in fact it's not necessarily a chronological series. That's my own personal opinion. I'm just going to take it over this word.
I got a question. If Nephi is alluding to the story of David and Goliath, why doesn't he make direct reference to it?
Well, it's a good question. I think that, for starters, Nephi doesn't... He says that they've got the brass plates. The only time he ever really directly uses them is when he quotes all this Isaiah material, and that's another oddity. You would think that he and his descendants would have had the brass plates right there, and he wouldn't need to re-put it down. I think that there's two reasons why he doesn't directly allude to it, and one of them goes back to one of the other papers that was dealt with here at this conference, and that is that his audience is not 100% Israelites at the time that he's writing. There's been some cultural merging, and there's a larger group of people that we're dealing with. There's no way that just Nephi and his family have split into two groups large enough to have had a number of wars and contentions over this rulership issue. So I think rather than going back and having to retell the story to everybody and then saying, and just like David and Goliath, he's putting the story out in a way that shows that there's some stuff going on here. And some of the group is going to immediately recognize these parallels, and some isn't. It just depends on who you're talking to. Another interesting thing that I didn't bring up, that I think might also go along with this, is you have this whole concept of the brass plates being worth more than all of their wealth. Going back to the Exodus, it's quite possible that Nephi saw his taking the brass plates as the spoiling of Egypt. When they leave Egypt, they take all this wealth with them. Well, he's leaving Jerusalem, taking something that's worth far more than anything he had. But he doesn't see it as stealing. He's taking the stuff that the Lord wants him to take.